Good morning and welcome to NNPA's live stream. I am Dr. Nasinga Burton, and today, as part of our HBCU President Series, we have the illustrious Dr. Wayne A.I. Frederick, 17th President of Howard University, joining us. Hi, Dr. Frederick.
Hi, how are you, Dr. Bates?
Good morning. Thank you so much for being here. We are so excited to talk to you. We've gotten lots of requests, like, when are you going to have Dr. Frederick on? When are you going to have Dr. Frederick on? So happy to have you here with us. So tell me, what is good? This is how I open up every interview because, a lot of times we're not covered. Our schools are not covered unless it's some negativity. But what is good? What great things are happening at Howard University?
Sure. I would say life is good. There are lots of good things that are happening here. The first is that we're getting ready to welcome our incoming class of 2024. And that's looks like it right now will be our largest incoming class ever in the history of the university. We have over 2,500 students that are signed up. And while it won't be everyone on campus, I think it certainly is going to be a generational class. We also have responded to the pandemic very positively and aggressively by assisting in the community, expanding our hospital resources, and really getting out into the community. So I think some of the things that the faculty have done to really be out and about and serving the African-American community has been commendable. So lots of good things going on.
Fantastic. So can you tell us a little bit more about specifically the ways in which Howard has been servicing the community amidst this pandemic crisis?
Sure. So we were one of the designated sites to treat people during the pandemic. And so that resulted in us having to expand our hospital. Actually, the mayor requested that we added a couple hundred beds, actually. And so we did that in fairly quick time. We also started seeing patients early on when cases were being detected in DC. And we actually had a pretty good experience having a lower mortality rate, especially among African Americans as well. So something that the team is currently writing up. What were the factors that influence the better outcome in our patients and what our experience taught us. We also went out into the community and stood up some testing sites. We got a grant from Bank of America for $1 million. And so we have a practice site in Ward 7, that's 95% African American population. And we put up a free testing site there where anyone could come in without a doctor's note and get tested. And then we expanded that to another testing site at a church in Ward 8. And so we've really been out and about in the community. Our faculty have participated in a partnership called the Black Coalition Against COVID with several community partners, looking at the issues around the COVID from the Black perspective. And they've done quite a job with community leaders in terms of getting the message out, encouraging people to wear face masks, encouraging people to be tested. And so I think we've done quite a lot in the community.
Yeah, sounds like it. That's fantastic. Can you tell us about what resources you had in place already at Howard Hospital? I told you we're going to talk a lot about Howard Hospital, but what resources you already had in place at Howard Hospital before the pandemic, really hit the U.S.?
The most important resource we had were amazing physicians and healthcare workers. Our frontline workers are absolutely fantastic. Howard University Hospital has been around before the university, which most people don't realize, 5 years before the university. From 1862. The hospital, it was Freedman's Hospital, and now is Howard University Hospital. But the hospital has served the citizens both from giving care, and so we had that resource, but also the educational pipeline. We sent more African Americans to medical school, and we graduate one of the largest African American classes every year in medicine, and we've trained more physicians and produced more physicians from our medical school than any other institution in the country. So I would say the most important resource we had were competent, culturally and clinically competent healthcare workforce.
Fantastic. Can you explain what cultural competence is for people who may not know exactly what that means?
Yeah, the context in which a patient is living and is experiencing whatever disease process they may be going through or illness is something that has to be understood from all of the social factors that may influence that. And so the example I like to use the most is one in which I myself did not do as good a job with a patient. A 40-year-old woman with breast cancer. I was able to do her surgery, and after her surgery, she needed chemotherapy. And on the first day of chemotherapy, she didn't show up. And I got a call from the physician only to find out from the patient that she was an hourly worker and had 5 kids and could not afford to miss a day of work to go get treatment. And it was disheartening. It was absolutely distressing for me, but it made me step back and realize that you have to put things in context. So it's one thing to know that we have an algorithm that includes chemotherapy, but if the patients can't afford to go get it because they have to sacrifice other aspects of their lives, they can't do it. And so you want physicians who understand the context in which the patients live in, and therefore treat the patient holistically, and not just treat the patient based on what the book recommends, but really we have to apply it to what the person's circumstance of life is going to dictate.
Right. So when you're talking about cultural competency as it relates to COVID and the people that you're helping in the community, what are some of the things that you all are keeping in mind that maybe mainstream institutions or some of the more popular, and I put that in quotes, organizations that are doing work? What are some of the things you're keeping in mind as you go out to help people?
Yeah, great question. A lot of these workers are frontline workers. They have to get on public transportation to get back and forth. They don't live in circumstances in which they could self-isolate. They may be in a 2-bedroom with 6 people. And how do you self-isolate? How do you have a bathroom that's separate? They may not have access to face coverings that are appropriate and not just cloth thin, but surgical mask, etc. So all of those are things that we have to take into consideration as to what we're going to recommend for that population. And then when it comes to testing, we have to be cognizant of the fact that those patients may not necessarily have tests. So you can have a drive-through test, but if you don't have a car, why are you going to go access a drive-through testing site, right? So that's why we stood up our testing site as an example. Same thing with contact tracing. This country has had a terrible history with African Americans and clinical trials. And so when you start talking about contact tracing and asking people, where they have been in the past 10 days, for the average, person in the communities we serve, that's an intrusion in privacy that's associated with other things other than your health. And so people look at that with an appropriate skepticism. And so who approaches them about that and how they approach could make the difference in terms of whether or not we are able to do contact tracing effectively, as an example. So all of those are factors that we try to bring. I think what Howard brings different to most other organizations.
Fantastic. So tell me about, so there's often chatter about Howard Hospital and how you have not decided to license your name out and join with a larger conglomerate, and the cost associated with maintaining Howard Hospital. What's the rationale behind that for people who keep asking that question?
Yeah, it's one of those things where I think people get nostalgic about it. We are the only historically Black college and university in America that owns its own hospitals, and so it owns its own hospital, and that's a source of pride, and I get that. But we also have to be practical. For of the 158 years that the hospital has been around, for 100 of those years, we actually didn't own the hospital. It was Freedman's Hospital, owned by the federal government. And we were able to access it and use it for training, et cetera, and to take care of patients, obviously. Once we took control after the Transfer Act in the mid-1960s, and the new hospital was built as part of that deal, we became owners. In the current landscape of when you look at the hospital business, it does not make sense to have a one single hospital of our size. When you think of purchasing power, as an example, if I go out to buy, hip replacement devices, and I'm buying them by the tens versus the thousands, you can imagine the price difference that I'm going to be buying them at. So there's several business reasons why owning your own hospital by itself doesn't make sense. And so we needed to seek and look for a partner with whom we could continue the business side of it, but still maintain our training, maintain the students being able to be exposed to clinical activity, And I think that we found a good partner in Adventist Healthcare, who
Mhm.
recognizes the history and the legacy, and will do everything that we would like to see done to preserve that as well. And so once we finalize that deal, that has to be an important part of it. We don't want the history of Howard to be lost in any way, shape, or form.
Exactly. And you'll still maintain control over admittance, like who gets into your programs, your residency programs, all of
Exactly.
that.
All of
Okay.
the academic, we have an academic affiliation agreement that we will also sign, and that will encompass all of those things that you just pointed out in terms of the training programs, who gets admitted to the medical school, all of those things we would still be running.
Oh, excellent. Okay. All right. So when we think about all the wonderful things that you're doing there in the hospital, and then we think about the students who are coming or may not be coming in the fall, tell us about what's going to be happening this fall with students amid this pandemic. And I also want to know what your testing situation is going to be with students. But
Right, excellent. Two excellent questions. So the first part is we are planning a hybrid to bring students back, and I do want your viewers and listeners to understand this clearly. This is a complicated situation. COVID has disproportionately affected African Americans. Howard University employs more African American faculty than any other single institution in America. So we have a sacred obligation to make sure that they stay safe. And obviously, African Americans with comorbidities are far more likely to succumb to this disease. So we are very sensitive to that. The flip side of that coin is we also take in undergrad population where 46% of the students are Pell Grant eligible. They're coming from low income circumstances where they don't have Wi-Fi. Some of our students have housing insecurity. Some have they have food insecurity. We kept our food pantry open the entire time that the university was shut down because we had students who needed to access that food pantry. So our student base also has a different requirement for why they need to be on campus. This is not a financial issue. As a matter of fact, it's going to be more costly for us to house fewer students and to be cleaning the place more rigorously, to be using PPE, etc. But it is a cost I feel that we should consider incurring because you have a freshman class who did not quite get to finish high school in the way that you would like them to, with that sense of achievement that gives them the win to come into college, and then to start them off as freshmen, not adjusting to college with a number of, first in the family, first in the generation in college. There's risk that these students may not adjust well, may drop out, etc. And so we're trying to balance those two things. So we are going to have a hybrid. Most of the classes will be online. We are trying to have students in single rooms on campus, and testing and contact tracing is going to be a critical part of that success. So our testing solution, we have signed an MOU with Thermo Fisher, and we will be standing up a CLIA certified lab at Howard University because of a very generous donation by Thermo Fisher, in which they have provided all the equipment, all the testing kits for free. And so that's
wow.
very proud of. And that's the other reason why we feel that we should try to move forward with bringing people to campus, because we will have a rigorous testing product with a 3-hour turnaround for test results.
Oh, that's fantastic. Because part of the challenge of getting tested is you get tested and then you have to wait 7 to 10 days for most places. That's the average, right?
So
Right.
having our own lab internally, we get to control that aspect, and
Awesome.
that is a problem.
Okay. And I had another question. Are you all involved in the vaccine trials at all?
We are getting involved in the vaccine trials. I will be writing an op-ed, and hopefully one of the major newspapers will carry it.
For NMPA? For Black Press USA? Is that who you're writing for?
We're going to try to
we'll take it
across the country. Okay. I feel strongly that we should participate in the vaccine trials as a community. And I understand the history. I understand, what happened with Tuskegee and syphilis. But you cannot have a disease that disproportionately affects our community and then have vaccine trials in which we are underrepresented. And then if those vaccine trials are positive and we start mass producing, we then find out whether or not it works in African Americans as well when we actually give it to them. That's not the time we want to find that out, right? That means it's a potential double whammy for us. So what we want to do is to be on the front end of that. So we are currently reviewing at least 4 different vaccine trials for the sake of participating, and we intend to participate both on recruiting patients and helping administer, but we also want to be on the science aspect of it as well. And so that's a very key criteria for us. We want them to involve our scientists. So we're evaluating about 4 trials right now, and we make a decision on at least 2 trials over the next few weeks.
So how do you get people, you know, because I'm an academic too, to move beyond what I call rhetoric and the true history? Like, it's real. What happened in Tuskegee, what happened in North Carolina, what happened in all of these different places that we know about is real. But how do you get people to move past that fear? Because I keep hearing in different places, like, I don't care if they have a vaccine, I'm not taking it for at least 2 to 3 years, or I'm not going to do that because they're not going to be tested on me. How do you move beyond? How do you get people, or have messaging that gets people to move beyond that place where we're stuck?
Yeah, we have to keep doing things like this. We have to keep talking about it. We have to lay the facts out for our community. We have to do that in mass opportunities like this, but we also have to do it one-on-one. And we also have to be honest about what has happened and acknowledge that. I think sometimes when we get into this conversation, we don't want to really accept people's fears because we don't think it's rational. But we need to say, okay, yeah, I understand that you're concerned, but let me tell you something. I have sickle cell anemia. I participated in an NIH clinical trial that looked at potentially keeping my blood pressure low so that my kidneys wouldn't be affected in the usual way, etc. I had to get an echo every year. I know what it is to participate in a clinical trial. And I think that's the difference with if Howard participates in a clinical trial versus if you have to go to a majority white institution and sign up. You may feel like you're just one of many. And what we think we provide is that cultural competence where we could relate to our patient population and say, listen, you know, we're here to take care of you. We already have your trust, and we're not going to burn that trust by having you participate in something that we don't think is in your best interest. And that's why being on the science side of it as well, I think is critical. And so I think we have to keep talking about it. We have to message it. I think people like myself have a responsibility as president of this university and as a practicing surgeon. I need to be out writing an op-ed about this issue and making sure that the larger community gets it. And yes, there are going to be naysayers who are going to say, you know, I shouldn't be encouraging people to participate in a trial. And that's what discourse is for. And and the discourse that takes place on the highest platform and highest level is the kind of discourse our community should be discussing. So I want people who look like me to argue with me about this issue and for us to have a real discussion about it.
Very good. So, I mean, what do you say to the naysayers?
You know, to the
people who just heard what we said and what we talked about, who are still like, I'm not doing it. What do you say to them?
Yeah, and I'm going to say I think that's unfortunate. It doesn't help move the needle. If less than 1% of the people who participate in a trial are African Americans, it's less likely that we get, you know, very strong data and evidence that it does work, and that's a missed opportunity. If you don't participate, then you know we need to give you data on why not being able to take the vaccine is problematic, and not having a vaccine right now is killing us in large numbers. And so that's another part of the argument. If we find something that could potentially prevent us from contracting it and then obviously succumbing to it, then we have to try to do it. And there's data to support it, whether it's with the flu vaccine or with other vaccines in our history, tetanus, et cetera. There's lots of data to support that those diseases that at one point eradicated significant numbers of the population were controlled because of treatments like this, such as the vaccine. And that's the evolution of medicine as well that people have to appreciate. So it's a robust discussion. We're not going to win over every single person. But I think as a community, we have to start taking responsibility for our community and not leaving it up to someone else. So if there's a vaccine trial and we own the only hospital, we're the only HBCU that owns a hospital, then we should be at the forefront of making sure that people get that vaccine.
Absolutely. Okay, so pivoting back to the fall, what specifically are you doing to assuage the fears of faculty, staff, students who are coming back in the midst of this pandemic, particularly with all the spiking that's happening all around the country, and the numbers in the U.S. and the lack of national leadership, as well as state in some places like where I live, but national leadership on this issue?
Yeah. So we're trying to have very extensive dialogue and communication about what we're doing and why. And so the first thing that we're trying to emphasize to everyone is that this is about you. Your personal behavior dictates a lot of the outcome. So if we first start with each of us doing what we're supposed to do, keeping our social distance, washing our hands for 20 seconds frequently, making sure that we wear face masks when we are in the presence of others, and not going out and about if we're feeling sick or have symptoms that we're unsure about and seeking medical care. If we all just start with that, doing that alone, that right there is the first major step to this being successful. And then all the other things that must follow from that in terms of I want my community when they get back to observe carefully what we're doing. And if they see areas and things where we can improve, we want people to point that out to us and we want people to participate in that. But once we lay the rules down, we have a pledge that everybody is going to be exposed to. And once everybody really abides by that, then we do that. You know, I hear this issue about Black Lives Matter all the time. And my argument is that how would Black Lives matter as well? And if they really do matter, and you really do believe in that movement, then your first responsibility is to the people right here in your own community. And so if you go out and, you know, party and you hang out in a space where you're not wearing masks, etc., you can't come and argue to me that Black Lives Matter, because you're right there saying that they don't. If you're going to come back into our community and infect your fellow community members. And so I think that our community is going to do a fantastic job. I think our students are conscientious. I think they are extremely altruistic. They're very compassionate about the movement. And I think that those things will spur them to do the right thing. And same thing with our faculty and staff. Our faculty are here because this is who they want to support. And as I said, we employ more African-American faculty than any other single higher ed institution. And so we have a reason to protect them, and that's in the hands of us as administrators and students and staff alike. And so we're going to do just that.
Fantastic. So can you explain to our viewers who may not know what a hybrid model is? Like, how is it going to work?
Yeah, so we're going to have about 80% of the classes are online. About 20% will be face-to-face. The face-to-face classes will take place in such a way that they will be streamed, live streamed to students who may be taking it online. So you may have some students in a classroom while you have other students in their dorm rooms or at home observing that class online. But every single class, even if it's face-to-face, will also be recorded and live streamed as well. And so that's what the makeup of the hybrid model is. And yes, the majority of those classes, as I said, will be online, but will be just as rigorous instruction as the face-to-face version of those classes as well.
Okay, so there's a lot of discussion, I think, about undergraduate populations, but what about, I mean, Howard has a ton of graduate students as well. In what ways are you supporting those students, you know, during the pandemic?
Yeah, and the grad and professional population here, as you pointed out, is significant. We have a law school, a social work school, school of divinity. We have a medical school, a dental school, and we have a graduate school with multiple graduate programs. So we do have a very complicated setup. In the clinical arenas, such as with the graduate school and the med school, the pharmacy school, the law school, the dental school, those students have been back and they have been in the clinical arenas already. They have done a fantastic job. Student accountability has been extremely high. We've had no positive tests since we've had them back. They have really been following the rules. I'm extremely proud of them. In the hospital, for instance, 2 students man the check-in area. Every student has to stop and get a little questionnaire regarding symptoms, temperature, etc. They get their temperature checked by their colleagues, and then they go about their daily activities. And so they have really helped police each other, which I think is a great public health experiment as well. And it has been high accordance with them doing a very good job and not contracting the disease and bringing it back into the hospital, not contracting the disease while in the hospital, because they've been following all the rules. And I think that says a lot about them. So we have been we have them back in the fold. In some areas, like the law school, we'll have a significant amount of online instruction, if not all online instruction, because they can facilitate that activity. But in all the clinical areas, we certainly are engaging our students already in those areas, and with very good results.
Okay. So a lot of people, and I can't believe we're still having this conversation in 2020, still question the value of HBCUs and why are they needed since segregation is over, allegedly, and all of these wonderful things. Can you speak to us or comment on why HBCUs are still essential and why more African American students should consider attending an HBCU?
Yeah. Again, this is not an uncommon question, but I tell people the question is not about relevance, it's about significance. The question really should be, how significant are HBCUs? And the answer to that is they're extremely significant. We represent 3% of all higher ed institutions, but we're responsible for over 20% of all the bachelor's degrees that are awarded to African Americans. We're responsible for some 34% of all of the bachelor's degrees in STEM disciplines that are awarded to African Americans in this country. If you look at the top 10 schools that send African Americans from their undergrad institutions to STEM PhDs throughout the country, the top 10 institutions are all HBCUs, with Howard being number one. If you look at the institutions that send African Americans to medical school, Howard is number one. If you look at Harvard's MBA program over the past 50 years, and you look at where their African American students came from, the number one supplier of African American students was Harvard undergrad, as you would imagine, but number two was Howard. So anywhere you look, and in any industry, whether it's judges, congressmen and women, senators today especially, and you look throughout the entire ecosystem, HBCUs play a significant role in diversifying those pipelines. And as I've heard many people say, if HBCUs didn't exist today, we would have to create them. And thank God they do exist. So what we need to do is to make sure that we make them thrive.
Right. Now, we got to talk about you. I didn't put that on the list. But you are a son of Howard University. What made you choose to go to Howard? Because you could have gone anywhere. And I'm not saying that in a disparaging way. I'm just saying that you were brilliant, bright, fantastic student, all those wonderful things. And so you were accepted to many colleges and universities. Why did you choose Howard?
I'm a triple alum of Howard, and I chose Howard because everything around me growing up pointed to Howard. I grew up in Trinidad and Tobago. I have sickle cell anemia. Howard University had a sickle cell center. My mom was a nurse, and so as she was thinking about my health, etc., the fact that Howard had a sickle cell center was great. The first prime minister of my Trinidad, who was the prime minister the entire time I was growing up in Trinidad, almost until I left to come to the US, was a guy named Sir Eric Williams. And he was a political science professor at Howard. He went to Oxford, and when he graduated, he came to Howard. He used to refer to Howard as the Black Oxford. And he used his time here at Howard to build his political platform that resulted in freeing Trinidad and Tobago from colonialism, making it an independent country and subsequently a republic. My mother was totally fascinated by this man, and so I myself became a big fan of him, and I recognized that Howard was a big part of his success. And then the physicians who took care of my brothers, both of my younger brothers, were delivered by Howard grads as well. And so everywhere I turned around and saw Black excellence in a country with 97% Black people, the Black professionals, all that I knew all seemed to have Howard somewhere in their history. And so it was obvious to me, and it was a humbling opportunity to be able to attend this great university.
So when you were an undergrad, did you ever imagine that you would be president of the institution? Like, when did you have those, did you ever have those aspirations?
When I came to Howard, I was part of the largest freshman class. It still is one of the largest, if not the largest ever, if not the second largest. So over 2,000 of us. If you lined us all up on 6th Street and you had to line us up in order of who would become Howard's president, I would have been at the end of that line. But I wasn't involved in student government, had no interest. I was a very quiet, fairly shy, very focused student, had no clue who the president was, no clue who the provost was. The interesting thing is I spoke to one of my predecessors, Franklin Jennifer, recently, who was president when I was here in 1990 to 1994. And he actually, just like all of my immediate predecessors, has signed one of my certificates or degrees, funny enough. And
Wow.
I was talking to him about that. And he was the first Howard alum to become president of Howard. And he said that he walked across the yard one day and said, I'm going to become president of Howard. I never did that. I never in my wildest dreams imagined being the president of this great university.
So what does it feel like, now, knowing then and way back when and where you started and where you came from and where you are now? What does it feel like to have been not only to have so much of Howard in you, but to have given so much back to your alma mater?
Yeah, it's humbling. What Howard gave to me, I would never be able to give back to her. I'm going to spend the rest of my life, not just my tenure as president, trying to give back to this place and pay down on that debt of gratitude. And I'm not going to come close, because Howard took a 16-year-old, 88-pound young man from Trinidad and Tobago with a chronic illness and made me a surgeon, and then turned around and made me a provost, and then turned around again and made me at 17 president. And that right there, I think, is the beauty of what Howard is, regardless of what my aspirations were, which was simply to become a physician and find a cure for a disease that affected my life. Howard gave me so much more and saw so much more in me. And that's what I have to not just preserve today, but enhance. What I want is for every student who comes here to have the same experience, because my story is not an exceptional story. My story is just a simple Howard story. And so that's what I'm trying to do every day. So I see this more as vocation than a job. And it's a very humbling opportunity to do it. And I don't think I will fully appreciate it until my tenure is over and I have the ability to look in the rearview mirror, because I'm consistently trying to look forward at what the next challenge is and what the next opportunity is to make us better.
Okay. So what do you tell the students who are coming in this fall? Like, do you think you have more cultural cachet with them because you are an alum? Like, what do you tell them to get them fired up? Because Howard alums are amazingly enthusiastic about the school. Like they just are. You always know where the Howard people are. Like, what do you all do to get that to happen?
I have to be honest. I think the people who come here come unbelievably committed to similar things, right? And I'll give you an example, because we don't screen for this, but this is what we get. When we bring students in, we have a day of service that occurs before classes begin. And I'll never forget, one year we had an incoming class of over 1,600 students, and 1,400 of them signed up for that day of service. And it's amazing. So the fact that people embrace the fact that they need to give back to the community, and they really rally around issues that affect the African American community so with such a fealty, suggests to me that it's in their DNA when they get here. And what we do is we simply unleash it. And I think that they go throughout their lives really focused on expanding on that and on making the world around them a better place, especially for people of the African diaspora. And I think that is why they feel that this place is such, it has such a draw for them as they go about their lives, because of what it has given to all of us.
Right. And one of the things that we talked about prior to starting the interview was homecoming. Now, Howard is like the homecoming for Black America. So even people who don't go to HBCUs, who go to other HBCUs, they have Howard University on the calendar in October. What are y'all doing this year? Are you doing anything? Is it canceled? Like, give us the scoop, because Black people need to plan their social calendars accordingly.
Yeah, well, obviously, it would not be safe to have homecoming in a traditional way that we would. So we have canceled that traditional homecoming, but we have not canceled homecoming, and I want to make the distinction. This is a presidential election year. Um, Hopefully, by the end of this week, maybe early next week, we'll have a vice presidential candidate with whom we all could have some affinity with. We have a country that is going through a major pandemic that is disproportionately affecting us. We've seen what has happened to Breonna Taylor and George Floyd. We've seen the uncovering of systemic racism for those who sometimes probably had a deaf ear to its voice. And we are lending a voice to that today. It's what all of that says to me is that Howard has a responsibility during this homecoming exercise to do what is right for the African American community. And that is to host something that we've been hosting for the past 2 years under my leadership, which is called HU Ideas, and to really speak to our larger community about what the problems are, define them, and to lay out what the solutions are, how we go about doing that. And that's exactly what we intend to do over the course of that week. We intend to let the Black intellect speak to America in as loud a voice as it could. And I think that there can be no greater celebration of a homecoming, but for us to come back home, not so much to the hallowed grounds here on this campus, but to come back to our soul, to our spirit, to our love for one another. And the best way we could do that is to empower each other with knowledge.
Yeah, that's a wonderful answer, and it makes me think about this whole anti-intellectual thrust that we're living through. And it's been forever. And you mentioned people like Eric Williams, and we think about Stokely Carmichael and folks of I would say Caribbean background who are African American, obviously. But this whole anti-intellectual thrust, I love that your goal is to combat that. Can you talk about the briefly, because we got to talk about the grant, the Bezos money, but can we talk about briefly the intellectual history of the intellectual history that Howard University has produced?
Yeah, it's amazing. I mean, the minds who have come on this campus and the work that they've produced, as a setup for what will be your next question or your next line of questioning. Toni Morrison, Howard alum, Nobel Prize winner, went to Princeton on faculty and taught a pupil by the name of McKenzie Bezos. She became her research associate, right? So what Howard alum do, especially around intellectual fortitude, you mentioned Stokely Carmichael. Probably the most impressive thing about him is his debating skills, his ability to create an argument on his feet. But that is because he was well prepared and well read. And I try to remind students today in this moment with the cancel culture around us that the essence of the fortitude of your intellect is the ability to have that discourse, regardless of who's bringing the argument and what argument they're bringing. You have to be able to put the facts out there. And so you have a Thurgood Marshall, a legal scholar that would go on to be the first African American on the Supreme Court. You have a Zora Neale Hurston. I mean, you have creators of art in a way that can warm the soul. So you have a Debbie Allen and a Felicia Rashad. Contemporary today, you have a Chadwick Boseman and a Ta-Nehisi Coates. When Ta-Nehisi Coates wrote about reparations, the appetite for that in America was probably minimal. Now it's voracious. And he wrote seminal work on that, looking at housing and those types of issues that today represents very, very high level intellect. And so, yes, the basis of all of this activity and excellence that has come out of this place is the intellectual fortitude. And we must not forget that as an academic institution. We must not be ashamed of that in our culture. We must promote it. And we must always come back to that argument. So when we look at a Senator Harris, who may be on the precipice of breaking 2 glass ceilings all at one and hopefully shattering them. You have to go back to the fact that on any given day, if you get her in a discussion about the most complicated legal discourse or some other policy issue in this country, she can hold her own, and she's right. She should not be embarrassed or trolled for being ambitious. That's exactly
right.
what we want our folks to do, and so she's doing it well, and we're proud of her.
All right, so let's talk about McKenzie Scott, formerly Bezos, and her generous gift to the university. Can you tell us how that came about?
Yeah, it was a complete surprise. I think we've been laying the foundation in terms of what we've been doing, especially over the past few years. This is not reported widely, although we put information out about this. Our 4-year graduation rate is up 20% since I've been president. We've put some things in place to do that. Some of the statistics I gave you earlier in the conversation about what and who we produce. People do that. And when people do research on us and they think about making an investment, especially people as wealthy as Ms. Scott and people who have ran successful businesses like her, they're very, very, I think, astute about where they're going to put their money. And she did, and her team, I would say, did all that research ahead of time. And they reached out, and the conversation was more informing us of the gift as opposed to trying to figure out whether or not we were worthy of the gift. And that's a different kind of call to receive about the largest gift in the university's history, to be quite clear. And so I'm very, very grateful, not just for her generosity, but for the way she went about this. It's an unrestricted gift that unleashes a power well beyond just the value of the gift. It also is an investment in what we were doing already, as she and her team communicated. And that, again, is also a very different type of gift. It was not just simply the potential that you have, but is that you have a track record, and that's something that you need to be in, that we all need to invest in. And the third thing was the interest in bringing others along and making sure that others see this as an opportunity to support great institutions. To give 116 institutions $1.7 billion is an amazing act of generosity, and one that, I hope lots of others would take note and recognize just how special what she did is and how special a person she is for having the thought to go about doing something like that.
Yes, it's fantastic. And Howard alums are very generous and invested in the university. What about people who aren't Howard alums? Like, how do you, we know Ms. Scott, she was connected to Toni Morrison, and she had a very kind of organic knowledge about Howard University. But how do you engage people who may not be connected to Howard University? How do you get them on board?
Yeah, a big part of it is we've got to be in those circles telling our stories, and we've been doing that. I mean, prior to the pandemic, actually, we had a record year. 4 of the 5 largest gifts in our history we raised in this academic year. Bruce and Martha Cash gave us an 8-figure gift. Dean Hopper Foundation, a couple, Dean and Mrs. Hopper. Dean is a Google employee, wanted to invest in STEM. He gave us a $4 million gift, and I could go on and on. So just in this academic year, and that's because we have been getting exposed to those people so that we could tell them our story. And what we're seeing is that our story and the excellence that we've been producing has been resonating with them, and it's something that people want to invest in. People want to see that we've established some kind of a track record, and they also want to see where their money is going to go ultimately. And in speaking to us, I think that's what they have been getting in terms of feedback, and that is key. You want friends to come along. It's the same thing with this issue of systemic racism. As I tell people, Howard has been on this journey to social justice for 153 years. Many people have joined the caravan recently, and we're thankful for that. But that has happened before, and they've left the caravan. And we're not going to leave until we reach the ultimate destination. But that doesn't mean when people join the caravan, we're going to ignore them. We're going to welcome them, and we're going to welcome their support. But we hope that we keep them along that journey. And that means that we have to tell our stories, and we have to show them that when they invest in us, they have a return on that investment.
Very good. So if anybody wants to ask questions, now's the time, because we're about to be winding down. Dr. Frederick, can you highlight some of the stellar programs that you have, academic programs that you have at Howard? I'm a fan of the communication school myself, but can you highlight some of the wonderful programs you have going?
Because we have 13 schools and colleges.
Yes.
So I will start
just a handful.
I'm going to start by saying all 13 schools and colleges are excellent, but I'm going to start with fine arts. Our division of fine arts, which will become the College of Fine Arts, I think is a signature program here at the institution. I think when you look at the artists that they produce, they cover the gamut, and they do it in an excellent fashion. And it's something that we have to lift up and really put out. If you turn on your television set any night of the week, there's a Howard alum on there. So everybody from Anthony Anderson on Blackish to Susan Kelechi Watson, on This Is Us, and I could go on and on. So we're doing what we need to do in that arena, and it comes from the great work the faculty and staff do in that college. The law school, it has been a signature program, has changed the course of history in this country. Brown versus the Board of Education in Topeka, Kansas, is an area of law that really, again, this institution played a significant role in making sure that that case was won in the Supreme Court. And that law school has continued to really be the core of our social justice movement. And so I think it's another fantastic program. We talk about medicine a lot, but I think we tend to forget that the patient is the center of our affection. And as a result, all the healthcare providers around that patient are critical. And so pharmacy, nursing, allied health, and dentistry are three programs in the health sciences area that do things that are remarkable. We have a shortage of nurses in this country. You look at the number of Black pharmacists in this country, which has dwindled. And then you look in the dental school. If you think the pipeline to medicine is compromised, the pipeline to dentistry is held up by Meharry and Howard University dental schools. And so I think that, again, signature programs. And then the last thing I'll highlight is the social sciences and humanities here on our campus. So everything from political science to African-American studies, et cetera. I think really the bedrock of who we are lays really in the social sciences and the humanities on this campus. What you get there in terms of the grounding, and in terms of really finding solutions for the larger social ills, really comes out of those signature programs in the social sciences and humanities.
Fantastic. All right, so is there anything I didn't ask you that you'd like to leave us with today?
No, I think you covered the entire gamut, and so I appreciate that. I do want to shout out that, you know, NNPA, again, has been an organization at the forefront of telling the truth. And for that, we appreciate you and all the work that you continue to do. I think is fantastic, and we really, really appreciate that.
Thank you. And we will be contacting you about an op-ed because, you know, we service over 200 papers and over 2 million people online. And I think it's always, you know, fascinating that people don't know our stats and how long we've been in business and really giving voice to African Americans in this country, all over the country, not just in the cities, also in rural areas. So thank you so much for joining us. Keep doing what you're doing. You're definitely inspirational. And I wish you a great fall 2020 from one academic to another. I'm not a president. But from one academic to another, I wish you a fruitful fall 2020 and come back and join us some other time, okay?
All right, thank you. Stay safe and stay healthy. And everybody, please, social distance, wear your mask, wash your hands frequently.
Fantastic. Thank you.
All right, thank you.